Thank you for joining us for another episode of Needed Conversations with Ryan and Viktoriya Cole. On today's episode, we're asking the question, why does my spouse tell me that they're fine when they're really not fine? We're talking about communication in this summer short series, and today we're talking about nonverbal communication. We're talking about those passive-aggressive things that we do to our spouse. Why do we do them? Let's get to the bottom of it today. Stay tuned.
Well, we're so excited about the Forevermore Getaway happening August 30th and 31st. And it's going to be an amazing time. We did it last year and we finally opened up registration. We're just getting ready to actually launch our promo, but we wanted to give you guys an opportunity to sign up before anyone else, because once we put it out there, the spots are going to be filled up pretty quick. We only have about 90 spots left for the couples. I mean, now less than that.
Well, less than that, because many people have already registered.
Yes, so
yeah.
you want to make sure you hop on that. And not only that, if you're one of the 50 first couples that register, we are giving away some gift cards to some foods around that area. So some of your meals will be taken care of. But not only that, the registration for this getaway will take care of a reception, which will be Friday evening, and then also a banquet dinner on Saturday evening. And I'm so excited about that because you get to dress up and have a good time with your spouse. You know, there's not many times that you actually get to dress up with your spouse besides like weddings. And that seems like it's not about you. But this day, it's going to be about you and your spouse. And so I think that it's such an important thing to invest in your marriage and just really spend quality time with your spouse and also other amazing couples in an amazing Hotel Hartness.
And we've got the ballroom that night, all night long, so you can slow dance until your heart's content and have some wonderful food and desserts. It's truly an incredible experience because we have brought the best of all marriage events together. We've done some research studying, what makes a marriage event successful. And it's bringing all the good pieces together. People say, well, I love the fact that this was like a more luxury experience and it was a getaway. It was a little more expensive though. And the teaching really wasn't all that. Nothing really changed in my marriage. Then you have people to say, hey, I showed up in, a cardboard paper hotel, like a low-end hotel chain, and it was amazing teaching, but if only it was more romantic and a little bit more luxury, that would have made it perfect. And we said, well, we can do both of that. We can be affordable, but luxury, and also offer you a transformational experience through strategic workshops and practical strategies that you can take away. And we have an immersive experience that I love on Friday night where we take you with a multimedia experience on a journey of understanding God's design for marriage. And this year we're focused on communication, ding, 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 as we've been talking about this summer in our summer shorts too. So make sure you register. Go to forevermoregetaway.com right now. Reserve your spot, reserve your room. It's an event you do not want to miss. Labor Day weekend. All right, let's jump into this summer short. We're building on that foundation of communication that we've been talking about, which is prayer, how to ultimately handle conflict resolution. But what about when the confrontation isn't the problem? It's what's not being said that's the problem. Today, we're going to be talking about the role of nonverbal communication, how to analyze your spouse's body language, their facial expressions, and their tone of voice to really understand what they're saying behind their words. And furthermore, understanding why you may be passive aggressive towards your spouse.
And this is a great segment, not only for married couples. I know we have different listeners, that may be single, some that may be looking for a partner in life. And these are some of the practical tips that you can actually start applying with other relationships as well. It's not only in marriage. And so, one of the things that I thought about is, that expression that we say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And oftentimes the tone of your voice, the way you look at a person, a little bit of attitude that you give them, that speaks a lot louder than the words that you're speaking. And then sometimes what we do is we'll go back instead of confronting and having those open conversations, we go in isolation. And then the enemy starts planting these seeds of like, did you see how they looked at you? Did you see their body language? Like, and now you start narrating the story in your mind, which causes you to spiral. And I think that that's really, especially in closer relationships like marriages and close friendships, is where a lot of us get in trouble because we really start like processing information and creating scenarios in our minds that really don't exist because we misread how somebody was acting or just their body language. Or maybe at that time they were just at a low, So maybe we had a misunderstanding. So we're going to break down several things today to help you to kind of read people's body language. You're not in control of how somebody responds whenever you tell them a specific thing. But I think that you can be sensitive about and in tune as to like reading into their body language so that you can say, I need to approach this with more care. I actually need to confront this person. I need to say, hey, what did you mean about this versus going in isolation and allowing the enemy to do his work in your mind.
And you can tell whether your spouse is sincere when you're talking with them or whether
Yeah.
they have a chip on their shoulder. We're not ignorant. We feel these emotions. And so to act like that's not a reality, your words mean nothing if your actions don't correspond.
Hmm.
We've said before, even when apologizing, an apology means nothing. I'm sorry. Okay. Really, I don't even know if I like that phrase that we've adopted because it's almost a declaration of your bad quality. I'm sorry or sorrowful. I'm a sorry individual. No, I apologize. And furthermore, this is the actions that I'm going to take in order to see that this doesn't repeat itself and that my behavior changes. And this is the depth of my heart change, expressing that with the right attitude. It's not just begrudgingly agreeing to cooperate. It's full-heartedly surrendering your will for the will of God, number one, but also this collaborative relationship, this collaborative decision that you're making. We counsel couples who have experienced adultery. And unfortunately, I can read between the lines. When a couple comes into our office, I can really spell out and say, this person's still having an affair. This person is unwilling to change. If this
Hmm.
person isn't having an affair, they're surely not bought into the idea of counseling. And we've actually turned people away, not in the sense of we've said we're not willing to help you. Victoria and I are 100% dedicated to the transformation of a couple when they sit in front of us. But what we're not going to do is drag people through the mud. And we're not going to continually sit in front of you for you to stonewall your spouse and be uncooperative in the process. We've seen people show up in our office just so they can put a check mark to say, we tried counseling.
But they really have not.
They
Just because you have
haven't.
attended counseling does not mean that you've actually put in your heart and your soul and saying, I am going to humble myself. And maybe even when things are pointed out that is my fault, I'm going to say, hey, it was my fault. And I need to step up to the plate. Because listen, it takes two to tango. And it's never that just one person's fault. And I think we find that out really quickly once we start going through different things in counseling of all the stuff that they have went through, maybe the foundational things that they were not taught at the beginning of their marriage, and they thought their marriage, was supposed to be that way, and they've lived for years and years and years really in dysfunction. So it's very important for us to be very open and vulnerable. And Ryan often says this, to have integrity, and to have integrity means to be fully integrated, which means that whatever is on the inside of you is also on the outside. A lot of times we want to present well, but that's not really who we are, or that's not.
We want to be agreeable with our words, but our
Yeah,
heart is really not changed or our posture towards our spouse.
yeah. And according to a neuroscientist that we've, is a person that we've interviewed here, she said that's actually causing brain damage when you're speaking something here, but internally that language doesn't match that.
And we're guilty of that, especially in the faith world,
Yeah.
because we want to speak well. And it's not to say, if you're feeling these resentful words or resentful feelings towards your spouse, that should give you permission to speak ill of them or treat them bad. No, you should bridle your tongue, and you should speak things that are not as though they are. We understand those principles, but ultimately, in order to see the transformation take place, you've got to do the inner work that it takes to transform the way that you think and the way that you feel about your spouse, about the situation, about marriage as a whole. If you want an excuse to get a divorce, you will find an excuse. If
Right.
you want an excuse to stay together, you will find that excuse. So wherever you place your mind is where you're ultimately going to end up. And it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's unfair to your spouse to say one thing out of your mouth and for your heart and your posture to be turned in the opposite direction.
That's right.
If we want to use this trendy word, it's the equivalent of gaslighting them. It's making them feel crazy to say, no, you're crazy. I never said that. Well, you may not have said it, but I can sense your intentions. I can sense your posture towards me. I think a couple scriptures that are connected to this when it comes to your actions speaking louder than words is 1 John 3:18. Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth.
Mm.
I love this because you want your actions to be aligned with truth. And it emphasizes the importance of showing your love with your actions and your body language and not just with the words that you say. James chapter 2 says it the same thing. Faith by itself without works is dead. Matthew 7, by your fruit you will know them. James chapter 1, do not merely listen to the word of God and deceive yourselves. Do what it says.
And you know, at the end of the day, how we have prefaced this whole little communication series, little summer shorts as we want to call them, is we gave you guys foundation, and that's prayer and the relationship with God. And one of the scriptures that I pulled up is Psalms 19:14, where it says, "May these words of my mouth and this meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight." So you're not walking before men. You're not walking before your spouse, before your children. You're ultimately walking before God. And it's so freeing to really live in the truth and be open and allow God to mold and shape you into who you are and to really walk before God in a pleasing manner, meaning that you read the word of God, you pray, and whenever the Holy Spirit urges you, hey, ask for forgiveness. Hey, you were in the wrong, to take that correction. That's really what this means.
Absolutely. Yeah, when it comes to these sort of aggressive behaviors that we have towards our spouse, we have to do the deep work and ask the question, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? What is it that I'm suppressing that needs to be brought to the light? And sit at the table, as we say, establish an altar in your home, a safe place where you and your spouse can communicate, even if you need to sit a Bible on the table to remind you of the foundation of your relationship and the respect that you should have towards one another. Do that. But you need to get to the bottom of why you are so passive aggressive towards your spouse. And on the other end, you have to begin asking questions. Why could my spouse be passive aggressive towards me? Is it because they lack faith in me? They lack trust in me? Do my words no longer hold weight and
Right.
value to them? Have I made so many commitments and backed out that I need some time and space to earn trust again? And they have a right to feel that way if they've been betrayed so many times, if you've always said, yeah, I'm going to do this, but you never do. And you have to understand that they are going to feel certain emotions about that. And you can't disregard those emotions. You have to confront them by showing up with action, not just mere words, but doing what you say.
Yeah, and so we kind of came up with a couple of practical things that I guess help you identify some of the things that you may be doing that you are not really aware of, or maybe your spouse is doing, that will kind of help you to figure out what is your spouse saying and how can I respond in a better way or understand better their emotions. One of those things is, understanding unspoken needs. I think all of us, especially going into marriage, we're kind of very careful with that at the very beginning and think later on we kind of start doing this body language and the faces and all that stuff because we have not expressed them verbally. Like as to I need my spouse to help me with taking out the trash, or I have asked them to take the trash out and they are just sitting there. Maybe I wasn't like open enough to say, hey, let me give him the time frame to take this out before you leave, or take this right now, or whatever. And so I think over time, you kind of start figuring out, like, okay, your spouse's heart is kind of hardened, or they are kind of irritated, and you have to like gauge it. Oh, it's because they've asked me to do something and I didn't follow through.
I think it comes down to expecting our spouse to be a mind reader.
Yeah.
Why do we do that? Do we expect them to become a mind reader after a certain amount of time, or is it immediate? There was this marriage coach online that I saw that was being raked over the coals over this little short statement that he made. And he was talking about communication just like this. And he was telling a story of himself. And he said, when he was younger into his marriage, his wife one night told him, you know, before you come to bed, can you put the food away?
Hmm.
And have you seen that?
Yeah, I did. He said, can you put the food away? And he said, okay, I'll do it.
So she went on to bed, and so that was dinner that they had,
Mhm.
essentially, and so he saw all the pots on the thing, he put the lids on them, he opened up the fridge, made some room, and put all the pans in the fridge, all the pots, whether it would have been mashed potato, I don't know what it was, but nevertheless, she woke up, and she looked in the fridge, and then she was like, "Why did you put that in the fridge?" And he said, "Because you told me to put the dinner away." And she was like, "But I expected you to, take it out, put it in Tupperware containers, put it in
Wash
the
the
fridge, wash
dishes.
the
Yeah.
dishes, clean up the counters." And so this was a big deal for them. And people were raking him saying, "It's common sense. Why would you put pots in the fridge?" And so what we think is common sense to people is not common sense. Because the truth is, we are all raised differently. Culturally speaking, like the way, like even Victoria and I, we have differences in how we clean the house. My mom taught me to clean top from bottom, corner to corner. And Victoria cleans as she goes. Like she moves from room to room. And I'm a deep cleaner and she likes to tidy every single day. I would rather clean at the end of the week one good time. She would rather make sure before her head goes to bed at night that the entire house is tidy.
And I don't think either one of those things is wrong. I think
It's not a right or wrong.
we've learned over time to kind of say, hey, this is important to her, so I'm gonna do what I can to offload her. Like, let's say Ryan takes care of the kids, and I have about 20 minutes to wind down. But I've had to learn to step away and not start like really working and doing more work after the kids go to sleep, even though like that's probably my prime time to do it because the kids are asleep. And then the same thing like when we have guests over, or we have to really clean the house deep clean. Ryan is like picking up all the chairs and getting into all the little crevices that probably I don't really get to unless it's like, 1 month in, or 1 month in and I have some extra time. That's really when I do it. But it's not a wrong thing. I think it's just over time learning each other's ways of
And
growing
eventually,
up and learning how to clean.
yeah, and eventually you'll develop a rapport with your spouse,
Yeah.
right? Hopefully 20 years in, you're not still having that same conversation. That if she tells you, "Can you put away the food before you come to bed?" that you understand what she means.
Because
But
of the way she likes it.
if
Yeah.
you've never explained that, right, then you should not expect them. And then you're going to do what you're going to do. You're going to roll your eyes, you're going to breathe, you're going to give him attitude. And he has no clue. If she didn't speak up and ask, "Why did you do that?" Right? She would have had a chip on her shoulder the entire day. And he would have thought, mine's raised. Now he's making stuff up in his head. Did I do this? What did I do? Does she think I'm being unfaithful? But like he's escalating it in his mind. And it can go both ways. It's about really clarifying what your expectations are and not thinking that your spouse is going to be a mind reader, which kind of brings us in the second thing, which is conveying emotions. Oftentimes, we think that our spouse can read our emotions and our body language that's being expressed. Well, depending on their upbringing, they might not have been in a household that was full of emotions. Maybe emotions is a new thing for them. Maybe they grew up more stoic, or maybe it wasn't permissible to show emotions. God forbid, but it happens. And if you don't understand that, then how would you expect them to read between the lines and the cues that you're showing? For all you know, they think it's a nuclear bomb, it's the end of the world, and you're like, "No, I just cry."
Right.
Emotions were allowed in our home. So conveying those emotions is one thing, but explaining them is another thing to say, I feel X. The reason I'm crying is because, or the reason I've given you an attitude is because, and then explain it so that they can associate your feelings with a response or an expectation.
Yeah, this is definitely a mature way of responding to emotions, but also if you do see your spouse low, it's your time to have, hey, recognize my husband needs something or my wife needs something, and maybe to come up to them and verbally ask them. They need that support. And so it's important for both of those things to work together, whether it's, be verbal about your communication and, I mean, not communication, about your emotions, and also, if you see your spouse behaving a certain way, then maybe approach them as to why they're behaving the way they are.
Yes, and this is the next thing, miscommunication and a misinterpretation. When you're misreading those verbal cues, you might start to draw conclusions that just aren't there. And that's also cultural too. In certain cultures, eye contact is heavily emphasized. In other cultures, it's not. We have all of these cues. I was watching this video with this woman talking about the cultural differences and how they come about. And one of the examples she gave was that I believe it's in China or in Asian countries. When you give someone a gift, it's it's unpolite to open it in front of them. So what
Mm.
you do, you thank them, you put it away out of sight, and then you open it when they leave, because if you open it in front of them, you're portrayed as greedy
Can't
and
wait.
you can't
Yeah.
wait to open up. Whereas in American culture, it's the exact opposite. If you were to do that, it'd be like rude and you know, brother, or that's what you would feel, right? You want them to open it up in front of you and make a big deal about it or try it on. And, it's just a whole cultural nuance that has to be addressed, especially in your marriage. And like Victoria and I comes from different backgrounds. Hers Ukrainian, I'm American born. But even if you're both born in America, West Coast, East Coast, North, South, like there's differences even interculturally that can take place. Even I would say in Slavic communities, Russian and Ukrainian, even though they're so close, there
Yeah.
can be nuances and even down to your family traditions and patterns.
Yeah.
So,
Even to the subculture. And that was one of the other pointers too. It's culturally and subcultural differences, even though, like, I know Ryan and I have big cultural differences, but even if you're married within the same culture, you could be Southern. And there's two types of Southern, you know? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you're still going to come from two different backgrounds. And so that means that you're meshing and creating something of your own. I also heard this really funny thing. Somebody was asking, I don't know if it was like Asian or somebody, like, why do you guys bring food to your deceased, like to the graveside? It's not like they're going to come up and eat it. And they said, well, why do you guys bring flowers? It's not like they're going to come up and smell them. And I think this is why exposure is so important to other cultures, because it really helps you not to be like very closed off and thinking like, oh, my way is right or my culture is right and everybody else is wrong. No, we have to be very open. And that's what helps us to really thrive in all relationships. Even once we have kids and we interact with other families, we also have to reinforce it with our kids. Our kids say, well, why does that family do this? Well,
yes.
that family, that's their traditions, that's what they permit, but we in our family don't permit that. And so that really helps us to establish a culture of our own.
I want to end on this because we're talking about body language, nonverbal cues here. Really, it comes down to our perceptions, our preconceived notions, our assumptions that we bring into a relationship or an interaction, especially with our spouse, that informs that body language.
Yeah.
How you perceive a person is ultimately how you will receive them.
Mm. True.
And you should understand that going into communication with your spouse, especially if you have transgressed. One of the biggest examples of this, I think it's one of the most fascinating stories. It's one of my favorites from the Bible, is in the book of John, the interaction with Jesus and the Samaritan woman, the woman at the well. And he comes there, and culturally speaking, there was tensions between Jews and Samaritans, racial tensions. Then you had the male-female dynamic of this woman had been married 5 times, and she was living with a sixth man, and here comes a Jewish man, of all people, demanding something of her. "Can you get me a drink of water?" And so, even though it's not spelled out in the narrative, the way that she responds to him, the words that she chooses, and knowing all of that contextual background, you can just imagine what her body language was towards him. And it wasn't until he spoke to her in a way that changed her perception that she said, "I perceive you are a prophet." And then almost in the narrative, you can feel her body turn towards him, her
Mm.
heart endeared towards him. And then slowly and surely, the onion peel of the layers of her brokenness were peeled away. And she saw him for who he really was, because he saw her for who she really was, not based on her circumstances. And so, as you consider your posture towards your spouse, are you giving them the cold shoulder or this passive aggressiveness because you're viewing them through the lens of your hurt? Maybe it's not even anything that they did. You're viewing them through the lens of the hurt that you've experienced through other men in your life, or your parents, or trauma that you experienced, and you're putting that on them and giving them a punishment for a crime they never committed. Now, let's take it a step further. Maybe they did break your trust, or they did something that offended you. Maybe it wasn't even on purpose. Maybe it's one of these cultural things that we've been talking about. Has that changed your perception of them? Because ultimately, until you change that perception, you're not going to be able to receive them as the gift that God has called them to be in your life. And it's going to show in your body language. But the moment you change that perception, no matter if they have trespassed, if you've chosen first to forgive, you've chosen first to see them in light of the grace of God, then your body language is going to turn, your heart's going to be open, and you're going to be able to effectively communicate your hurt, your pain, your expectations, your joy. And that is ultimately what's going to cause your marriage to bloom and blossom.
Yes, oftentimes we focus on the person versus focusing on what they're saying and my own posture. Again, like we talked about in Psalms, it's written, "The meditations of my heart be acceptable before you." God sees things that we do differently. You know, a lot of us as people are like, "Oh, murder is wrong." But God says that even if you hated a brother, you already murdered him. So that means you've contemplated in your heart, not really killing a person, but you just don't like them. And we have a problem in our culture of confronting people. We would rather go behind their back and talk about it versus actually solving the problem and causing more issues. And so before anything else, know that you are walking before God. Is the meditation of your heart acceptable before God? Do you have hatred towards your spouse? Do you have unforgiveness? And that's why it's manifesting in your body. You know, maybe you're overly emotional, or you're on an emotional roller coaster because you have not dealt with certain issues in your heart. You have to allow the Holy Spirit to uproot those things so that you can see, like Ryan said, your spouse through the lens of grace.
Yes, this is so good. Well, this was a little bit longer than normal, but I think it was really good. And we would love to continue this conversation with you in person at the Forevermore Marriage Getaway, happening August 30th to 31st. It's an incredible experience for you and your spouse. Make that investment right now. Don't wait. Don't overthink it. We live in an overthinking society. Go now, forevermoregetaway.com. Register, reserve your room, and we will see you there for a weekend of transformation. God bless you. This has been a needed conversation.
Yes, it has. We'll see you next week.